Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another question and narrative video, and today's topic is the New World. Yes, I'm referring to the Americas, specifically today, North America. Because what I have been pondering is the difference in the history of North America versus the rest of the world. And it all comes down to this narrative of the Americas being the New World. Well, what exactly do they mean by that? People like to say that the New World is referring to when the Europeans discovered the Americas. But what I'm thinking is that it's not really about the Europeans so much as they are trying to convey to us that up until this point in time, there was no sense of civilization in the Americas at all. We seem to have this constant narrative of what really we could refer to as savages, at least the way that they describe the people who were here at the time that the Americas, again specifically North America, were said to have been, quote, discovered by people like Christopher Columbus. Now, I think that most of us, if you're watching my Question the Narrative videos, you know that we know that history is mostly made up. And we don't even know for sure that Christopher Columbus even existed. But even if we would believe the narrative of Christopher Columbus, he wouldn't have even been the discoverer of America because he never even set foot on the mainland. And there is ample evidence to show us that at the very least, the Vikings arrived in North America. There has been evidence of them in Massachusetts, in Nova Scotia, in even Oklahoma. I just found out, and I was floored to find that out, and also in Minnesota, hence the Minnesota Vikings. But were they the first people to civilize North America? I have really serious doubts about that. Just as with what happened in 2020, we'll just say, anytime something is pushed on us over and over and over again, I am more likely to disbelieve it. And that is where the whole idea of the New World comes into play. If you actually Google the New World and the Americas, you will find so much information, so many maps, so many movies, so many documentaries, because the idea of the Americas being this new world has been pushed so much. And then, of course, we always have to tie in just this idea that the people who were living here at the time were completely primitive and that there was nothing noteworthy at all to be found other than maybe some teepees and some wigwams. In fact, though, what we find is that there is a ton of evidence showing that there were advanced civilizations in the Americas, again, specifically North America. Yes, they were in South America too, but the point of this video is really about the way that it has been completely covered up. At least in South America, they are willing to acknowledge the advanced civilizations that were in there. But for some reason, or in North America, the academics do not want to admit that there was any sort of advancement at all. We have pyramids in North America. We have mounds in North America. We have what was thought to have been an ancient civilization in the Grand Canyon in North America. And let's just read a little bit of this. So it says lost civilization and Grand Canyon was, wait, Egyptian. Now, I'm not saying 100% that this is absolutely true, but there has been so much evidence that has been found that has been completely covered up by not only the academics, but also the Smithsonian Institute, which is it? Yeah, that's another question, the narrative entirely. But anyway, why are so many things in North America covered up that would have been tourist attractions in other countries? In fact, one of the, I obviously wasn't able to get a photo of it. There is a pyramid in Georgia that is completely closed off to anyone being able to go in and explore it. Now, if you believe what Scott Wolter of America Unearthed said in his show, and yes, you do have to kind of be a little compromised in order to get a show on network TV. I completely get that. But even he was ticked, supposedly, at not being able to get onto this site. And again, my question is, why is a site that would be a tourist attraction, that would be a moneymaker for any other country, completely ignored, completely covered up? And why are the people who try to tell others about these sites ridiculed? Okay, so let's just go back to this one. I got a little distracted there. At 277 miles long, up to 18 miles wide, and 1 mile deep, the Grand Canyon is one of the most beautiful and awe-inspiring places in the United States. The Hopi Indians believe it is the gateway to the afterlife. Its sheer immensity and mystery attracted more than 6 million visitors in 2016. Now, before I go on, I do want to share an interesting hypothesis, and I believe that it was Steve Quayle that I first heard it from. But in Egypt, it is, during the famine, and this is something else that was brought in by a friend of mine. During the famine, they had enough food to feed everyone, and a lot of people wonder, well, where did they come up with all of this food? Well, on top of that, we also have the idea that the royal family, so to speak, of Egypt, they had annexes everywhere. It wasn't just in Egypt, it was an entire empire. And it is thought that the Grand Canyon could have been part of this Egyptian empire. So what really does seem to look like pyramids in so many photos of the Grand Canyon, and what has been found to be Egyptian relics in the Grand Canyon, could very well be the remnants of that. Now, some think that it was possibly mining. So that's why some of it looks so mined. And they may have actually been going there to mine in the Grand Canyon. And then they also built their civilization there. Because you have to wonder, how would Egyptian relics be found all the way across the ocean? So I found that to be very interesting. But what it says here is, but what those people probably don't know is that the Grand Canyon might once have been the home of an entire underground civilization. But where are they now? And why did they abandon the canyon? And I find this very, very interesting. An underground civilization, especially regarding what I talked about a few videos ago. And let's just go down. It all started in 1909 when purported Smithsonian Institution, oh, those guys again, explorer G.E. Kincaid discovered strange caverns during an expedition directed by Smithsonian anthropologist S.A. Jordan. The entrance to the cavern was nearly inaccessible, but Kincaid was able to get in to make an incredible discovery. The enormous caves, which radiated out from a center cavern like spokes on a wheel, were full of artifacts, including statues, copper weapons, even granaries full of seeds. Hence the idea of food for the famine. Its size indicated that 50,000 people could live inside comfortably. But even more amazingly, the artifacts didn't match up to anything in the known record. Rather than appearing to be of Native American origin, as one might expect, because that's all we're told was here before, it was discovered and began to be the New World, the objects had distinct Egyptian or Tibetan designs. Could there actually have been an entire civilization of Egyptians living there? If so, how did they get there? The story caused a huge sensation when it broke in the Arizona Gazette in 1909, but was soon met with skepticism. The Smithsonian has no record of either of the scientists nor their discoveries, what a surprise, and firmly quells any claims that Egyptian artifacts have been found in either North or South America. And we all know the history of Smithsonian and just the denial that they have for the truth, and in fact, the way that they like to hide it. Anyway, and no one has been able to find these supposedly massive caves since, because they're not allowed. Was this some elaborate hoax, maybe perpetrated by the Gazette to sell papers? That's certainly a possibility, but it doesn't fly for many conspiracy theorists. Oh yes, we got to get that term in there because we have to kind of make people not want to believe this article. Anyway, that doesn't thwart me at all. Some argue that the Smithsonian Institution has purposely wiped Kincaid and Jordan from their records and actively destroyed artifacts that don't agree with the status quo story of human history, and that's exactly what what they've done, and not just with this topic, but we know just in our research on giants that that is exactly what they do. You know, it's not even a secret anymore. Others think the caves hold a passage to the fourth dimension, where the reptilians, yep, who have secretly run the world for thousands of years, emerge into our world. Still others believe the area is top secret and closely guarded, like Area 51. And just reading this section here about the reptilians running it, that actually reminds me, I rewatched a movie called Dinotopia. I'm sure that many of you have seen it. And I first realized that they are talking about the world beneath. And who runs the world beneath, or who at least at one point was in charge of the world beneath in Dinotopia? Well, a reptilian figure, of course. It is Dinotopia. But I found that to be funny that even as I'm watching this show, I'm rewatching it and seeing it with new eyes, and I'm like, yep, they're even talking about the world beneath there. Anyway, so is this series of caverns proof of a long lost, possibly Egyptian civilization that's simply being covered up by the Smithsonian? Or is it a passageway into this dimension for our reptilian overlords? They just, yeah, they just have to try to discredit everything. One thing is for sure, you'll have to listen into the podcast. Well, I think that I will probably pass on that, but I will leave a link in the description box to this article in case you would like to read it. But really, it's just more proof of the fact that yes, there were civilizations here before the European explorers came here. On top of that, we have many areas where there are actual underground cities or underground towns that have been found. And one of the main themes that I have found with these towns is that they always have something to do with a time period around the 1890s. For example, we have underground Eureka Springs, which I did talk about in another video, and it was said to have been re-engineered in the year 1890. And what I'm thinking is that a lot of these underground cities were actually much older than what we are being told, and that they have to, for some reason, set it into the New World narrative. So we'll just read a little bit about Eureka Springs. According to local history, two major streets in downtown Eureka Springs underwent considerable re-engineering in the year 1890. 1890 is going to be a theme also in this video. I did do an entire other video just on all of the really strange things that are said to have happened around 1890. So I encourage you to watch that. That's in my Question the Narrative playlist. But anyway, moving on. Main Street was the first official street in town, built in a low-level gulch alongside a small spring-fed creek. It suffered from frequent runoff problems and quickly earned the nickname Mud Street. Dare I say mud flood street? I don't know. Hence the need for improvements. The second street in town requiring attention was Spring Street, as it was also becoming a main thoroughfare for carriage traffic. Today it serves as the primary route for much of Eureka's historic loop. These significant road improvements reportedly raised the overall level, and that's what you're going to hear a lot also, is that they claim to have raised the level of roads. And I actually did videos on them raising entire cities, and some of them people were actually said to still be working inside the buildings themselves as they were being raised. Completely ludicrous, but these narratives all accompany the New World idea because they've got to come up with some sort of way to explain why all of this civilization, yes, civilization, was here already at the time. Let's see. Thereby making basements out of the once street level facades. These original entrance levels were walled off and now lie hidden within a string of disconnected subterranean limestone tunnels. Over the years, these mysterious and somewhat dangerous passageways have become known as Underground Eureka. So we've got that, and then we also have the Seattle Underground. And if you take notice, this happened after the Great Seattle Fire of 1889. There we go. We've got something else that's filling in that whole 1890 narrative. And that's something else that you will find tied in with a lot of the cities that are found to be underground. They're always tied in with some sort of fire that also has a ludicrous explanation. And we'll get into some of those fires in a bit. We have evidence of mudflood buildings all over North America. I mean, look at this. What does that look like to you? That certainly looks like mud to me, piled completely up against the sides of these buildings. And yet there are people who try to deny that there was some sort of mud flood here. It boggles the mind that someone could look at this and think that it was just something completely ordinary. And then even here, it certainly looks to me like there was a level that had another entrance that would have been beneath this, almost as if the rest of this was dug out. And yes, you will find photos, I believe it is, of this being constructed. But I just want to remind you that they do renovations on buildings as well. So let's not forget that. Now, even beyond this, we need to look at what certainly seems to be Tartarian architecture, especially at the World's Fairs. Now, you might believe the whole idea that these buildings were replicas and were temporary, but then I need you to explain to me why so many of them are still standing today. It doesn't hold water. But look at this. This was in the 19th century. This, in fact, was 1893. Yes, we've got another one of those time periods very close to 1890 where it just seems that all of a sudden, bam, everything really started happening in the New World. So where did all these buildings come from? Yes, I do believe that some of them were probably replicas, but I also believe that some of them were buildings that were already standing here and that the replicas were built almost to fit with the theme of what they were trying to convey at the World's Fair. They were trying to re-educate people at the World's Fair, and they were trying to give people what they want them to believe is the history of this new world that they are living in. But if you take a look at this, this is, again, the Chicago World's Fair. And I have to point out to you, the Chicago World's Fair in 1893 was 690 acres of buildings, whether you believe it is real buildings or replicas. There's also lagoons. There was landscaping. 690 acres. Oh, did I also mention that this was supposedly built on swampland? That's something else to consider. So yes, I do believe that some of the buildings were built for this fair, but I believe that they were built to match the other style of the buildings so that they could then kind of hide the truth in plain sight so that the people just believe that it was all there for the fair. There's some more of the World's Fair architecture that we are supposed to believe is just replicas. Oh, and also 690 acres, and they claim that it was built in, I believe they said the World's Fair of Chicago was built in 2 years. So, yeah, I don't buy it. So something else that I find astounding in this photo is not just the architecture of what is definitely seems to be an advanced civilization, but it's at the number of people being brought in there. Have you ever been to a museum or to like an amusement park where people are being bussed in and then it's completely overcrowded and you can barely move? It almost seems like people were deliberately being brought here. For what purpose? Again, I'm going to say it. They were being re-educated. They were being indoctrinated into what the made-up narrative is for this country that they were now living in. And you know, the thing is that when you see architecture like this over in Europe, they are happy to tell you that it was built, in, we'll say 1100 AD. Or some of the architecture, especially in Greece and in Rome, they will tell you that it was built before Christ. And they are perfectly happy, letting you know that it was built a long time ago. But for some reason, whenever we find buildings like this in our own country, we're given the explanation that these are all just replicas. They were built as they were modeled after the older style buildings. They will never admit that they were already here to begin with, just as they have been in the rest of the world. Why is it that they are trying to cover this up so much in North America, yet every other country with exception to Australia, because they pretty much give the same explanation in Australia as they do for North America. So I'm just going to count them in with the New World too. Um, every other country, they can readily admit that those buildings have been there a long time. But for some reason in North America, they don't want people to even exercise the idea that it could be a possibility. You're ridiculed if you think that this could possibly be true. And here is another photo of this. Actually, is this a rendering? No, it actually looks like it may have been a colorized photo of some of the architecture and the beautiful landscaping and the fountains and the pools that, you know, just so happened to be made only for a World's Fair, which, by the way, I also have to mention that most World's Fairs lost money for the cities that hosted them. So why did they keep doing them? Why did they continue to give these lavish World's Fairs? For what purpose? I just find it very hard to believe that these cities would have the wherewithal to build these beautiful World's Fairs that were likely going to lose money for them. There had to be an ulterior motive. There is always an ulterior motive. So I skimmed through this article because it just said it was about historic Chicago, 5 fun facts about the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. And that is what I'm referring to as the Chicago World's Fair, but it is actually called the Columbian Exposition. But what really got me was number 2, the civic buildings nationwide mimicked the fair's Beaux art style. The chief architect of the fair, Daniel Burnham, chose the Beaux Arts architectural style for the fair's main buildings. Beaux Arts design is characterized by classical details like columns and pediments. Because, yes, it definitely wasn't ancient architecture. This is something that was done specifically for the World's Fair. Okay. Highly decorative surfaces, statues, symmetry, and the use of stone. Sounds familiar. Burnham's choice of style influenced architecture in the United States for several decades. Many turn-of-the-century towns, now this is another one, okay. Many turn-of-the-century towns, meaning around that 1890 time period, city halls, libraries, and courthouses look very similar to the buildings at the World's Fair. Well, isn't that a coinkydink? Well, what I'm thinking is that those buildings were already there at the turn of the century and that they just came in and occupied them, and that the whole idea that they just so happened to mimic this architectural style just for the World's Fairs that lost money. Yeah, again, I don't buy it. One interesting tidbit that I did mention in another video, but I just thought was worth mentioning here, since I brought up the entire indoctrination of the people through these World's Fairs, is the fact that these World's Fairs did have human zoos, where they gave their own narrative of who and what these people were. And so, yes, they actually put these people on display at the World's Fairs as part of their education campaign. This is, in fact, the famous Geronimo. Yes, he was actually featured at a World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. The real Geronimo. At least that's what they tell us. Now, you may recall that I mentioned that the Chicago World's Fair was built just a couple of decades after the Great Chicago Fire. And that is also something I have done an entire video on the Great Fires, because what you can basically do is type in the name of pretty much any major city, and sometimes not even major cities, sometimes just moderately sized city. And if you type in the name of the city and Great Fire, you will find that there is some Great Fire that wiped out the entire town and very often had some ludicrous explanation for how it was started. The Chicago fire is a great example of that. So here it says the origin. The fire is claimed to have started at about 8:30 p.m. on October 8th in or around a small barn belonging to the O'Leary family that bordered the alley behind 137 West DeKoven Street. The shed next to the barn was the first building to be consumed by the fire. City officials never determined the cause of the blaze, but the rapid spread of the fire due to a long drought In that year's summer, strong winds from the southwest and the rapid destruction of the water pumping system explained the extensive damage of the mainly wooden city structures. There has been much speculation over the years on a single start to the fire. The most popular tale blames Mrs. O'Leary's cow, who allegedly knocked over a lantern. Others state that a group of men were gambling inside the barn and knocked over a lantern. Still other speculation suggests that the blaze was related to other fires in the Midwest that day. Now, I also have to point out that if it were just one incident where you have a drought going on, and if you actually continue reading, you'll find out that they originally, I think it was this one, where they went to the wrong place. Yes, they did. The firefighters were initially sent to the wrong place, allowing the fire to grow unchecked. So if little things like that happened once, you might think, okay, well, it's possible that there's a drought and they didn't have enough fire hydrants and they were sent to the wrong address. This happens over and over and over again in these great fire stories. Here is another one, the Great Seattle Fire, which happened in 1889. And I will leave links in the description to all of these pages about the Great Fires, and I encourage you to just have fun with it and just type in names of cities and see how many of them you can find with great fires. We've got the Great Boston Fire of 1872, only a year after the Chicago Fire. The Great Fire of New York. This one was a little bit earlier, 1835, but still, in the 19th century. Oh, but it says it was one of 3 fires that rendered extensive damage to New York City. Okay, then we've got the San Francisco Fire of 1851. So, yep, and that's not even getting into the earthquake that knocked out so much architecture there. And this is actually not a great fire, but this is actually something new that I discovered. There was a California Midwinter International Exposition of 1894. And I believe that this was in San Francisco. And look at this. This wasn't even a World's Fair. But look at that electricity. Yes, we know that electricity was already invented by this point. We know. But to this extent, and it even admits that few of the surrounding areas were electrified. But I had no idea that this even existed before. Just trying to look through here and see. Yeah, very, very World's Fair-ish though. I think this was kind of like a prelude to a World's Fair. So if all of that isn't enough to make you think, there possibly could have been some sort of civilization that they are trying to cover up for whatever reason. We've also got the 1890, there's that year again, census fires and other burned genealogy records. Yes, there was a census fire in 1890. I will actually leave this in the description box. There's actually been lots of fires. But the 1890 is probably the most popular, and it says what did survive in the 1890 census fires? About 6,300 names from 10 states and Washington, D.C., as well as Civil War veteran schedules for half of Kentucky, states alphabetically following Kentucky, Oklahoma Territory, Indian Territory, and Washington, D.C. So yes, in 1890, that pivotal year, there was a census fire. But wait, there's more. What do we have next? The Ellis Island fire. And what was Ellis Island? Ellis Island was one of the major places that the immigrants came through. And what happened in 1897? There was a fire there, which I have to just look at the architecture of this building. Okay, certainly seems Tartarian, what we would call Tartarian to me. Anyway, the immigration station at Ellis Island was only 5 years old when it burned to the ground on a summer night in 1897. Remarkably, for a facility designed to accommodate up to 10,000 visitors per day and some overnight, no one was killed, but millions of records were lost. But of course, the story of the first Ellis Island is also a story about the federal government assuming control of immigrant processing, of course, which was previously left to individual states. So the federal government steps in and there's a fire. Okay. Castle Garden on the tip of Lower Manhattan had opened in 1855 as New York's official immigrant station, but by 1890 it was clear the facility and its operators weren't properly managing the increasing immigrant traffic. So it's pretty interesting that it was 1890 that the federal government decided that they were going to step in. So in April of 1890, the federal government began processing New York arrivals. It would soon do so nationwide. The barge office, also in Lower Manhattan, served as a temporary immigration station while contractors enlarged the landmass of nearby Ellis Island. So do you see what I am getting at with all of this? We're pushed with this idea of this country or this continent being a new world, and there was never any sort of advanced civilization. Yet we have pyramids here, we have mounds here, we have mud flooded buildings here, which in fact I haven't shared with you yet. Actually, wait, yes, I did. I'm getting so worked up over this blatant deception that I can't even keep my head straight at this point in time. But what we've got to think about is just the fact that there are ruins to be found all over the world. The Egyptian pyramids are a tourist attraction, yet in America, the pyramids are pretended to not exist. Then, of course, we've got the pyramids, the Mayan pyramids, again, tourist attractions, but most people who live in America have no idea that there are pyramids there, because we're constantly told that there was nothing here before the Europeans got here. Then we have these beautiful ruins in Greece and in Rome, but when we find similar buildings in the United States and in Canada, we are told that they are simply replicas and that they were just copying the style, because there certainly could not have been any sort of advanced civilization here. Nah. What you will find in most areas of the world is that anytime there is a significant discovery found, like Pompeii, they will eventually open it up and they will invite people in and they will make documentaries about it and they will make movies about it. But how many movies have you seen made about what was found in the Grand Canyon, for example? How many movies have you seen made about the beautiful old architecture found in North America? Well, you're not going to find any, because we have been told over and over and over again that it wasn't really that old. It was all either replicas or just copies. Well, what I'm going to say to you is that I don't believe any of that. I think that something happened here in North America that caused them to want to completely cover up the idea that there could have been any sort of advanced civilization here. Why? I don't know, because they don't do it with any other part of the world except for North America, and I'm going to say it again, Australia. Something happened here. Something big, something they definitely don't want us to know about. But the question is, what? That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.